Hello, my name is Ivan Pehar, head of Spotify Canada, and welcome to our Love Audio event, The Podcast Revolution is Here. This is our third event in our series. Earlier this year, we kicked off with a deep dive in how Quebecers and French Canadians consume Spotify content, followed by our most recent event, where we shared our Kantar research on how Spotify provides incremental reach to traditional radio. And today we'll be sharing insights on the changing podcasting landscape. Some logistics for the session. I encourage you to ask questions throughout using the Q&A feature, and feel free to jump in the chat and share some real-time feedback. So let's do it. Our playlist for today will share the driving forces behind the rise of podcast consumption and why this matters for brands, followed by Alex Lung, product marketing lead, podcast monetization at Spotify, who will share podcast innovations we are working on. Next, we'll hear from Matt Houghton, Director of Digital and Integrated Marketing at Interact, from the lens of a brand marketer on why podcasts are an important part of the media mix. And we'll close with a fireside chat with Brandon Jinx Jenkins, host of the Spotify original podcast, Mogul and No Skips. So let's kick it off. So what are the key drivers of podcast consumption? Well, three key insights shed a light on this. Audio content is booming. We are truly in the golden age of content, with more music and podcasts created today than ever before. This gives us choice to listen to just about anything we want to, when we want to. With more ways to listen, innovation is pushing audio streaming forward, creating more moments to connect with your audience, no matter how they are listening. Many of us will listen to streaming audio on our phone, connected speakers, smart TVs, and in our car. And all this in a 24-hour period. And lastly, discovery and personalization is key. The more personalized the content is, the more our audience engages, discovering new content, music, and culture through multimedia experiences. As Canadians, for the second year in a row, we out-listen the US, as 71% of Canadians have listened to online audio in the last month. Not only have we surpassed US listeners, we also out-listened Australia, Germany, and South Africa. All this in the last month. Well, 2021 is a tipping point for digital audio. In a recent eMarketer study highlighting media consumption patterns, Canadians will spend more time listening to digital audio versus traditional radio. We expect to see that time spent gap increase over the coming years, and clearly a trend that is here to stay. Not only does audio act as a companion and enhance moments and activities throughout the day, but people are also actively turning to audio as an escape from too much screen time. A recent study shows that screen exhaustion is a real thing, and 56% of people feel that audio is a nice escape. In these screenless moments, advertisers are able to complement their visual media with audio messaging and connect with consumers during times when their eyes are elsewhere. While podcast listening has exploded over the past few years, and Spotify is uniquely positioned as the world's leading audio platform. Let's take a deep dive into what this means for Spotify. Spotify now has 356 million monthly active users, and 25%, or 85 million plus, are now listening to podcasts. But what is really important here is by advertising on Spotify, we are unlocking access to an addressable audience for both our ad-supported and our premium listeners. Podcast represents the first time an advertiser has ever been able to reach our premium listeners on Spotify. Truly a unique differentiator. We have officially reached a critical inflection point for digital audio, and the number of podcast listeners has grown at a rapid pace. Today, 1 in 3 Canadian adults listens to a podcast. That is over 11 million podcast listeners in Canada. Now, with consumption increasing, so has podcast creation. 2020 saw a more than 280% increase in the creation of new podcasts, from just over 300,000 new podcasts started in 2019 to almost 900,000 in 2020. That's almost 2 podcasts started every single minute throughout the entire year. With world-class content on the platform, we now have 2.6 million podcast titles on the platform, including over 400 original and exclusive podcasts. We now have 4 world-class podcast studios. Spotify Studios is Spotify's in-house production company, which seeks to amplify the world's best stories and storytellers. The Ringer, a website and podcast network covering the latest and greatest in sports and pop culture. It was founded by legendary sports writer Bill Simmons. Gimlet Media, the award-winning narrative podcasting company that aims to help listeners better understand the world and each other. And with Parcast being the premium storytelling podcasting network, focusing on scripted, story-driven programming that is engaging, informative, and entertaining. On the right side, you'll see 6 of our biggest podcasts in Canada. Edison Research recently published their list of most listened to podcasts in 2020, and the Joe Rogan Experience came in as the #1 podcast listened in Canada. Over the past few years, we've been building out a world-class advertising platform. We now have 4 key parts of the podcasting value exchange. 1, listeners, a direct connection to over 85 million global podcast listeners. Creators, giving creators best-in-class creator tools that most importantly democratizes the creation and distribution of podcasts. We have 4 best-in-class content studios under the Spotify umbrella and many key licensing partnerships. And lastly, monetization. With Spotify advertising, we're up-leveling the standard for podcast monetization. So let's jump into why we believe podcasts should be a core part of the modern day media plan. And we essentially believe that 3 key benefits are provided by podcast advertising: valuable audiences, engaging environment, and drives action. Podcast listeners are inherently first to market early adopters. They tend to be younger, more educated, and more affluent. 55% of Canadians 16 to 34 listen to podcasts, with 45% of podcast listeners having a university or postgraduate degree, and 49% of podcast listeners are in the top 10% of earners. Plus, they're also a young audience. They're also often cord cutters who are hard to reach through traditional media, like TV, for example. For brands, it's crucial to break through the clutter to reach this unreachable audience. Heck, 62% of podcast listeners also say they use ad blockers on the web. Podcasts are a highly engaging medium. Listeners actively choose to spend their time with their favorite podcasts, typically tuning in to either be entertained, stay up to date, or to learn new things, making podcasts an incredible medium to land your brand message. Here are just a few key stats to describe the mindset of a podcast listener. 51% of listeners like to consume podcasts so they can learn more about something they're interested in, with over 80% of listeners completing an entire podcast when listening. Now that's engagement. And lastly, and most importantly for brand advertisers, is driving action. Podcasts are a truly intimate, engaging, and trusted environment, and represents the optimal time to land your brand message. 57% of listeners have taken an action as a result of listening to a podcast ad, visited a company's website, gathered more information, used a promo code or discount mentioned, and ultimately making a purchase of a product or service. So this gives us a high-level overview of what's happening in the digital and streaming audio space, the importance of the podcasting space to Spotify. Now I'd like to bring up to the virtual stage Alex Lung, who's going to walk us through the podcast innovations happening at Spotify. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Evan, thank you. And hi, everyone. My name is Alex Long. I'm on Spotify's monetization product marketing team and lead our podcast efforts. I've been really fortunate to have incubated our podcast business from the ground up and have led the recent go-to-market launches for both the Spotify Audience Network and streaming ad insertion. So before I jump in to talk about our recent podcast ad innovations, I want to set up a bit of market context. So despite the high levels of engagement and the efficacy of the medium that Ivan has just kind of talked about, investment in podcast advertising has been limited to date in Canada. So why aren't more advertisers investing in podcasts? Well, there have been some fundamental challenges that have prevented advertisers from taking full advantage of this emerging medium. The first challenge is the inability to target audiences with precision at scale. So most of the industry continues to transact on a title by title basis, and most of our competitors don't have the scale or the direct connection of listeners to offer audience targeting. The second challenge is the limited insight and understanding of ad delivery and efficacy. So the podcast industry, by and large, measures ad delivery by the number of episode downloads. However, insight into ad delivery with downloads stops the moment the audio file is downloaded onto one's device. There's really no guarantee that the episode was listened to, let alone that the listener reached or acted on the ad. And third is just barriers to entry. Podcasts have historically been a challenging medium to access for small and medium businesses due to high minimum spends and a lack of self-service tools. So we started addressing each of these key challenges head on. We introduced the Spotify advertising marketplace that allows advertisers of all sizes to target engaged audiences across our network of podcasts. We've got streaming ad insertion. Streaming ad insertion allows digital planning, reporting, and measurement for advertisers and delivers much needed insight into confirmed ad impressions. And third is we're opening up podcast advertising to businesses of all sizes via our self-service platform, the Spotify Ad Studio. So before I jump into the Spotify Audience Network, I wanted to quickly highlight an advertiser perception study conducted in Q4 20, where they asked podcast advertisers, which podcast advertising buying method works best for achieving KPIs? The top two responses by a very wide margin were by audience segment and across the podcast network. And that's part of why we're so excited about the potential of the Spotify Audience Network. We believe that podcast advertising will ultimately scale with audience-based buying because we believe for advertisers, content is effectively a means to an end, which is speaking to potential customers. So what is the Spotify Audience Network? It's an audio-first advertising marketplace that offers audience-based buying across our network of podcasts that now includes leading third-party podcast publishers. If you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that our network includes podcasts from our 4 studios, Spotify Studios, The Ringer, Gimlet, and Parcast, as well as leading third-party podcast publishers like Viacom CBS, The Wall Street Journal, and Vox. Our advertising partners will be able to target listeners leveraging easy-to-use audience-based targeting tools like demographic targeting, geographic targeting, and interest segments, with all of the media delivered in a highly engaging environment, both on and off Spotify. So what we're ultimately building here is an audio-first advertising marketplace with podcasts and publishers on one side, and podcast publishers and creators on one side and advertisers on the other. And really, this is all with the mission of connecting millions of advertisers with billions of listeners. So the Spotify Audience Network offers a truly differentiated offering for advertisers. First, the Spotify Audience Network offers meaningful listener reach and scale for advertisers across our premium network of podcasts that now includes leading third-party podcast publishers. Advertisers can leverage easy-to-use audience-based targeting tools to reach their target audience and reduce wasted ad spend. And 3, it's premium content. The Spotify Audience Network unlocks access to premium content across our 4 studios, as well as leading third-party podcast publishers. We have a really robust audience menu to help you hone in on your target customer in an engaging podcast environment. So if you're a tech company, we can help you to reach tech early adopters. If you're an auto brand, we can help you reach auto intenders. If you're a regional brand seeking to geo-target listeners in a specific province, we've also got you covered. The second innovation that I'm really excited to talk about today is streaming ad insertion, or SAI. So we launched SAI back in January 2020 at CES. And SAI unlocks digital planning, reporting, and measurement for advertisers and delivers the most rigorous and transparent reporting available in podcasting. SAI delivers unprecedented insight into confirmed ad impressions, audience insights, and creative performance, and ultimately delivers the intimacy and quality of traditional podcast ads with the precision and transparency of modern-day digital marketing. So on this slide, I wanted to quickly highlight the evolution of podcast ad tech. So back in 2004, essentially at the dawn of podcasting, podcast creators began monetizing their podcasts by simply recording their ads directly into the audio file. This was known as burned in or baked in ads. In 2013, a significant innovation came into the market known as dynamic ad insertion, or DAI. This new ad technology allowed podcast creators to really insert advertisers' ads at the point of download. And this enabled advertisers to have insight into how many of their ads were downloaded. However, the real limitation is that there's no guarantee that the episode was listened to, let alone that the listener reached or acted on the ad. And that's where SAI really comes into play. Leveraging streaming, we were able to insert ads in real time and deliver much needed insight into confirmed ad impressions and report out on unprecedented first-party insights like audience insights and creative performance, with all that data leveraging our first-party logged in user data. Next slide. Great. So really the final innovation that I'd like to highlight is the launch of podcast advertising in our self-service platform of Spotify Ad Studio. So we just recently launched a few months ago in the United States, and it basically allows advertisers to book advertising in our self-service platform of Spotify Ad Studio. So really with as little as $1,000, advertisers of all sizes will be able to get started and tap into the Spotify Audience Network. Next slide. And as a reminder, the podcast ads in Ad Studio is currently in beta in the United States, but we're going to be expanding to international markets in the coming quarters. But finally, just to wrap here, really what makes Spotify's offering unique and differentiated is that we can offer one of the world's most robust audio-first media buys in the industry. We've got a really robust title by title podcast offering that allows advertisers to run ads and hit podcasts like Joe Rogan, the Bill Simmons podcast, and Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard. We've got podcast packages available that enable advertisers to align with our original and exclusive podcasts. We have the Spotify Audience Network that enables advertisers to target and scale their reach across our premium network of podcasts. And we, of course, have our ad-supported music inventory to help drive home your messaging with ad reach and frequency. With that, I'd love to pass it back to Ivan.
Thanks, Alex. As you can see, there's a lot of things at Spotify that are keeping us busy on the podcasting side of it. Understanding the changing landscape, the innovation, I'd like to bring up Matt Houghton to the virtual stage to share his perspective on how brand advertisers think about the podcasting space. Hey, Matt, welcome to the stage.
Hey, Ivan, thanks for having me.
So Matt, how about, we kick this off, if you could introduce yourself and maybe share, some of your favorite podcasts or things you're listening to right now.
Sure. So I work for Interact Core, and I'm the director of digital and integrated marketing. I've been there for about 2 years. And Interact, as I'm sure a lot of our audience knows, powers all of the debit payments for the banks in Canada and powers all the e-transfers in Canada. So we're a product and service that really touches all Canadians. For myself, I feel like I never have enough time to listen to all the podcasts that I like. I'm a really big music fan. So, I like Mogul. I'm pretty excited to hear what Brandon has to say in his fireside chat. Broken Record with Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell is a favorite, as is Song Exploder, just getting into the weeds of how songs are written, with artists that you like. I also like The Watch. Mark Maron's probably my ongoing go-to. And then lastly, I've been a skateboarder and snowboarder my whole life, and there's a lot of pretty niche Canadian produced podcasts about skateboarding and snowboarding in Canada. So I dabble with those a lot as well.
Matt, if I could just ask you, to build on that, when do you find the time to listen to all these podcasts? What does your consumption look like?
Literally any chance I can pop my AirPods in and listen to a podcast, I will do it. I could be cleaning the bathroom in my family's condo. I could be doing the dishes. I could be out for a walk. I find I'm also creeping into when I might normally be listening to music, working out. I find I'll listen to podcasts in a way I didn't before. So I'm just kind of constantly finding times where, I can have that more intimate experience with my headphones on and, just enjoy the storytelling and the podcasts. It's definitely something I value.
So Matt, let's pivot to, how Interact is thinking about, the podcasting space, and, Interact was one of the early adopters in the podcasting space and did some really innovative stuff, a few years ago. Alex had mentioned how the podcast buying landscape is changing and giving you now the ability to buy audiences at scale. So, where does the podcasting, medium sit within Interact?
So it's a great question. And I think there's really two drivers for us that makes it such a good fit in our marketing mix. Number one, it just fundamentally aligns as a medium so well with our primary target audience. And, our primary audience is a younger, tech savvy, very busy person, their mid 20s to mid 30s, skews slightly more female. And they're a very heavy user of our debit product and quite loyal to using debit. So that's the primary audience we're talking to. And they are active podcast listeners. It's a medium that they like and they use regularly. They do not dabble in a lot of traditional media. So fundamentally, we know that the main segment of Canadians we want to reach are present in this medium. And then we're also just philosophically very focused on being personalized and, the old maxim of the right message for the right person, right place, right time. And I think the placement with podcasts can really help us achieve that. And because you can be digitally connected, we're also, very focused on the audience journey in all our campaigns. So podcast messaging can really sit neatly within that journey and allows you to engage people and get them from the top to the bottom of the funnel as well.
So Matt, you touched on right there and you said, the podcast creative, right? That engaging messaging and that, when we have users, and I shared today that a third of Canadians are listening to podcasts on a monthly basis. They're averaging more than 5 pods per week that they're listening to. How do you think about that creative and aligning to both the audience as well as that episodic content that users are listening to?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the ways we're looking at it, I think, a little differently, because to your point, Ivan, Interact's been investing in podcast media for some time. But we launched a new brand platform this year in the spring, and it's called In Life. And it's adding a more emotional message to the functional benefit of our product. So it's really about, Interact helps you be in control of your money to allow you to get more out of life. And through that platform, we're really trying to be resonant with our audience in their passion points in their areas. It's really like live the best life that's meaningful to you, that you're passionate about, but have control of your money, do it in an affordable way. And we're not judgmental about how you do that or being prescriptive about how you should do it. But that's really the evolved position of our brand is this emotional payoff to the feeling of control you can get. So aligning with the audience that we want to target with that brand platform message, and then being able to buy into specific pods, subject matters that they like that are meaningful to them, we can really connect that philosophy of our brand message to be, adjacent or connected to the pods they're listening to. And I think it gives us that opportunity to have some authenticity with our message, because they're hearing it with something that's meaningful to them. And I think further to that, and I think what I enjoy about listening to podcasts, it's such an intimate experience for people. It's so immersive. So I think being able to be a part of that real one-to-one consumption is so nice for a brand. And it just fits so well for us with this new brand platform we brought to market.
So Matt, I just want to, everyone on the call who's joined us today, if you have any questions for Matt, please drop them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer all the questions there. So Matt, you get bombarded with, a ton of insight and, different vendors and partners reaching out to you. We know that there's fatigue, and we've all experienced fatigue over the last, year and a half that, we've been in this situation with like 3-second views and everyone's being distracted. How do you think about, working with your creative partners on building that right message from a creative lens? When you have someone who's leaned in, you mentioned your own experience, washing the dishes, going out for a walk, listening to, to a podcast episode. How do you think about that intimate interaction with that user?
I think, at the end of the day, it's got to be contextual to the medium. So, we'll have our broader overarching message of a campaign, and we just really want to take that message and make it feel bespoke on whatever platform we're on. So I think you've really got to respect the experience within a podcast, like more so in many ways than other platforms. You can be swiping on your phone, like through 300 feet of content a day. And, you're just trying to like stop the scroll. But I think when you're within that podcast environment, you're really like entering someone's head. You're becoming a part of their experience as a brand. And I think to do it well, you've got to be respectful of that time, of that moment, and make sure the message is the right message for that person, fits and aligns with what they're about to listen to, and you're offering something of value to them. You're not just trying to sell, but you're giving them something meaningful. So I think creatively, like, we definitely push our teams to think about it that way and use the medium really effectively and respectfully.
So we have a question here from the chat, and it's from a brand advertiser who says, I've never done podcasts before. How do I get started? What's a recommendation on something they should explore?
I think so. It's a great question. I think you want to start with, like anything, you're going to start with your campaign objectives and what your media investment is going to be. But I think you really want to look at the role it can play in your media mix, and how can that add something that the other mediums you're looking at maybe can't offer. And I think what maybe made me feel trepidatious initially, and I come from an agency role, a creative agency role, before I joined Interact. So I would work with clients in that environment, and podcast ads would often be part of the work that the creative team would be doing. And taking a TV ad or a longer form YouTube video and the message that's there, and finding a way to translate that to 15 seconds of audio can seem so daunting. But you've just got to be crisp, and you've got to be sharp, and you've got to be open-minded to working with your creative teams to make sure the message works and it resonates. But it's a great part of the mix, and it's worked so well for us. And I think, again, with our audience, our primary audience, we're not buying radio ads. We're not going to reach them that way. So you've really got to go where your audience is, and then work hard and listen to the guidance you get from your agency partners, from the platforms, from Spotify, and dig into the best practices, and just be smart and strategic about why you do it and how you do it.
So we got another question here. A question from Kareem. Why does Interact advertise on podcasts? Why is that the choice? You sort of mentioned, Matt, like, you're not on radio, you are where the customers are. Maybe if I can, dovetail a bit more into Kareem's question is, where does podcasting sit within the media mix? Is it a digital bucket? Is it, sit outside as like testing budget, or is it just considered one of the core elements of just driving engagement against your audiences?
Yeah, it's a great question as well. And I thanks for layering on your comments, Ivan. It's really part of the media mix. I think we're trying more and more to look at mediums agnostically, and it's very tempting and easy to look at digital versus traditional. Truthfully, at the end of the day, you've got to build a media mix according to who you're trying to reach, and I think step away from preconceived notions about what might have been relevant 10 years ago versus what's relevant today. Like, build it from the ground up. And so we aren't necessarily bucketing a Spotify buy or a podcast buy within a digital category of our buy. It's just part of the buy, and it's purposeful, and it's got intent, and it's got a diverse ability to reach and engage in a complementary way, or even a leading way in some cases, versus the other media. So I think, again, I'd go back to my last comment of, like, don't be afraid of the medium and the brevity you have to have with that simple audio format. And also, like, as Brandon and Alex can talk about all day long, there's so many other ad formats that can complement that audio ad. So you're not limited purely to just an audio message. There's so many other things you can do, and it's definitely a fun platform to work with that way.
So Matt, last question for you here, and thinking, future outlook, right? So if we look at 12, 18, 24 months from now, audio and podcasting specifically is, had its second coming. For a medium that's been around for like 15 plus years, it's really reached that tipping point. What do you think is going to happen with the podcasting space moving forward the next couple of years? We know that users are listening. We know there's a ton of content out there. What are just, if you look into your crystal ball into how do you think that the space is going to change?
It's another another good question. So, one person's opinion only, almost as much as a consumer as a professional, if I dare call myself that. I think I love niche things. And I think as media broadly has evolved in the last, 5 to 10 years, the ability for people to consume things that are so relevant to them and so incredibly niche to them has gotten bigger and bigger. And I think it's one of the ways that podcasting has really ridden that wave, or even led that wave in many ways. Like, whatever it is you are into, you will find a podcast that appeals to you. And, Ivan, you were asking me about, some of the pods I listen to, and I was talking about some of these Canadian, skateboarding and snowboarding podcasts. And I've got a pretty deep background in those sports and that industry. And I can listen to podcasts where people I know are talking on them, and they're professional and they're well produced and they're really entertaining. And it's almost like I'm hanging out with friends, and I feel like that is such an appealing part for me on a personal level, listening to famous people who I would never be able to meet. But then on the other end of the spectrum, people you might know or have some degree of separation from are doing these great pods that address things you like and you love and you're passionate about. So I think it's only going to go deeper into that space. And of course, they can't all sustain, but I think the barrier to entry is pretty low for the gear and to publish them, and even to start monetizing them if you're a podcast publisher and producer. So I just think there's going to be more of that coming. And I think what I'm observing with some of the more niche ones, they're just getting better. You can go out and start one right now if you really want to, and you want to buy a good mic and some recording equipment and use your laptop and get out there and do it. So I think it's become a really sort of entrepreneurial DIY medium that can just connect with so many people. So I just see more of that coming.
Yeah, Matt, you touched on creation, earlier during, the first few slides I shared, last year, almost 900,000 new podcasts were created. The ability to create podcasts, almost anyone in the world can create content and distribute it out to the world. So, Matt, I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective, how Interact thinks about the podcasting space, where it fits into the overall media mix. And anyone, who hasn't, run a podcast campaign, thought about podcasts, I hope that, Matt has shed some light on, some pro tips to get out there and start to try something in the podcasting space. So Matt, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone who's listening in. And it's great to be involved. Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to bring up our next guest. Thank you all. This is the moment that I know we've been all waiting for, and I certainly have. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Brandon Jinx Jenkins to our stage. Jinx is an accomplished journalist, TV host, podcast host, writer, photographer, DJ. God, the list goes on and on. As a previous lead anchor at Complex, you reported on the latest in pop culture, interviewed, a range of figures, including Kendrick Lamar, Kobe Bryant, RIP, LeBron James, Donald Glover, J. Cole. The list goes on, and you'll recognize the voice. And for many of us, this will be the first time we actually get to see you. Your voice, in the critically acclaimed podcast, the Spotify original podcast, Mogul, Webby Award-winner, podcast in 2020, and your shows document hip hop's most iconic moments. Recently, you teamed up with New York Times bestselling author Shea Serrano to bring to life No Skips with Jinx and Shea, a new Spotify podcast which celebrates the most legendary and unskippable hip hop albums. I'm thrilled to have you here, and welcome, Jinx.
Thank you. This is I forgot I did some of those things, so thank you.
Wow, that was quite an intro there. To start things off, can you share a bit about your shows? So, Mogul and No Skips, and how they came to be.
Well, actually, I got pulled into the Mogul universe. Mogul was originally a Gimlet original before the partnership between Gimlet and Spotify, and it was started by someone in my arena, hip hop arena, especially podcasting, Reggie Osei, who passed away, who started the Combat Jack Show, one of hip hop's most important storytelling vehicles, and then also helped to engineer Mogul. And so when we lost Reggie, I think people were trying to figure out what to do with Mogul, and sort of who could not carry the torch, because what Reggie did was one of one, but sort of add some new life to it and new spin to it. And so just speaking to the team, I got a chance to take on that role, and it's been wild, just the stories that we've been able to tell. And then most recently, with No Skips, me and Shay are just internet friends, like we're Twitter friends. And I love what Shay does. We've sort of orbited each other over the years between the world of hip hop journalism and social media. And he sort of hit me up one day. It was like, hey, like, I want to do this podcast, him and the folks at The Ringer. And when I was like, oh, what are we going to be talking about? He's like, we're only going to talk about classic hip hop albums. We're going to rip them apart from the best song to the best lyrics to the thing on the album that we think is definitely untrue to the song that we can't live without. And we'll argue about it for 2 hours. I said, all right, cool, let's do it. So they're two totally different products, but they both talk about similar things.
So let me ask you, someone who's been a journalist, photographer, writer, TV host, you've touched on so many different mediums throughout your career. why did you lean towards audio as the platform to tell these stories?
It's funny because those other mediums have they all provide different ways to tell stories. Photos, especially in the age of Instagram, there's almost an instant gratification. I shoot film, so it takes longer, but you find this gratification when you put it out to the world. Doing on-camera reporting and interviewing, there's another gratification you get when people start to pull these interviews apart and they really love them. But audio provided something that was more intimate. I found that people would sit with the thing you were doing for half an hour, 2 hours, and then tell you their thoughts on it. And I realized that something different was happening with audio than with forms that were more visual, or even DJing where it's kind of in a party atmosphere. Audio is existing in your head. So you're becoming part of the storytelling. You're becoming part of the experience. To me, it's equivalent to that moment when someone says, oh, the book is better than the movie. Well, it's because you're part of the book. It's like it's your projector in your mind that's portraying the images. And with audio, we're able to have that sort of connection. And then on the other side, when you're not storytelling, let's say it's me and Shay arguing, or sort of the 3 or 4 people gathered around a mic format, you feel like you're there with them. You feel like you're the 5th mic. You feel like you're the other person sitting at the table with myself and Shay, or Joe Rogan, or Barack and Springsteen, right? Like you feel like you're that other person at the table. And that's something different that you don't get when you're watching a game show on television, or watching, live in the actor's studio. Like you're watching them, you're not necessarily a part of it.
So as someone who's been a journalist, how do you think about conducting interviews differently from like a traditional journalist perspective to, now, no skips and Mogul? It's just different. And then how do you go about preparing for it?
Oh, well, completely different. One, I can just wear a t-shirt, it doesn't matter. I can just do it from the house. But, I found that there's different tips and tricks that you can kind of, you can pull off that I actually like more in audio. When you're there with the person, sometimes you have to affirm them. You do like physical signs, whether it's a head nod, or you're finding yourself like reaching out and like kind of gesturing. In audio, it's sometimes it's like vocal. It's just a or a yes. And you find that people tend to give you more when they feel affirmed. So the things that I wouldn't do in video, or wouldn't do if I was sitting right next to someone, that I might do on the phone with them, or I might do in an audio format, that I think people tend to find a little bit more inclusive. And in video, I have less opportunity to talk to them sometimes. Sometimes you're really just sitting there kind of propped up and hoping that they give you everything they give you. In audio, I found that it's I can be a lot more interactive with them, a lot more vocally affirming, and ask questions that we know ultimately we can kind of snip if we don't want to keep them. Whereas video, sort of everything is there that you have to keep just for continuity's sake. So audio provides us a lot more ability to be nimble and move around and tell more dynamic stories.
So you mentioned intimate a few times, right? The conversation is intimate. I'm curious, how do you think about, building your audience beyond the podcast itself? What other channels are you using to continue to engage that dialogue, right? Because you'll put out, no skips will come out on Thursday, and we're going to wait a week for the next episode to come out. But what are you doing in between that week to continue to engage with the listeners and the audience?
Well, the great thing about it, especially I think with podcasting having such a low barrier of entry, is that a lot of people are talking about the things that they want to talk about. Matt hinted at it that you can have this interest that you think is niche, or it could be something that's really wide, but it's really you. And when these things reflect who you are, you sort of storytell throughout the week, whether you realize it or not. I might post a new song that we're not going to discuss on Mogul, that we're not going to discuss on No Skips, but I just happen to like right now. And that still fits into the universe of me talking about music and culture. Or I may post a clip of me DJing a party, which I'm very rusty at. I realized after a year and a half of not being out in the world, I need to work on it. But, you can find that people want to see these things, these other things that surround the person that's telling them stories about hip hop, or the person that's telling them that this song is the best song ever. Well, you have to kind of prove it. You have to prove yourself. And the great thing is that through access of social media, or any other projects I sort of I dabble into, or I take on, they all ladder up and they all build out this universe from this person that they're really just hearing in their headphones all the time. This person that's occupying some of their mental real estate.
So let me ask you a question. We've got a ton of people in the room here today that work in marketing and advertising professions, and you, someone who's worked at an advertising agency, when you started in your career, what recommendation can you have for them from both a creator's lens of when a brand wants to engage with you and your audience? What's the best way to do that? How do you ensure that a brand messaging fits within the tone of the content that you're producing?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is that you guys can target so many. Podcasting such a wide field. It's not like you turn on like ESPN, you're like, okay, this is just sports, like top level sports. I mean, if let's say we were talking about sports and podcasting, every sport and every angle and every position, from the coaching all the way down to the person with the towels, is represented in some voice or format. And advertisers have the ability to speak uniquely to them. I think when I first was in advertising many years ago, everyone was understanding target marketing at this point in time. They were like, oh, we can actually speak to the person we want to speak to. Well, it's one thing to speak to them. It's another thing to speak like them, to be in conversation with them, to have that right tone. And I realize even when I'm given ads to read sometimes, it's different when you mean it. It sounds completely different when you're saying the thing and you mean it. Even tracking, when I'm just reading for the podcast, it's different when it's my words that I've written and I actually really care about the subject matter. It's a slight fluctuation in the voice, but it's the difference between, truth and just someone just talking. And I think for advertisers, you have an ability to actually connect with your host. You have an ability to actually connect with this audience in a way that feels more legitimate, that feels like you're actually having a testimonial instead of just someone reading off of the script. And I think sometimes we get ads that we're not necessarily here, but I've done other products or other projects or even in videos that I've done in the past with brands like Complex and stuff. Sometimes someone's just buying an ad because this product has numbers, and it's like, okay, that's great, but does this align with your product? Does this align with your audience? Is this host or is this subject matter speaking the tone and the language that you want? We can all be saying the same thing, but I'm going to say something different than Shay is. He's going to say something different than Bill Simmons is. And he's going to say, we're all going to say something different. But now you have the ability to access that person directly or that project directly. You might as well get someone that speaks in your native tongue.
So let me, you addressed something really off the top when we were speaking about Mogul and No Scripts, of how they're vastly different. And Mogul is scripted, episodic, hours and hours goes into that 40-minute episode, versus No Skips, which is the three of you or the four of you just jamming on a mic. What is your thought process go into how you prepare for each one of those different types of environments?
Oh man, well, I think all people, we all have not even a duality to us, but a plurality to us. We all have our different moods. And just recently, I did a crossover with No Skips and Mogul. And Mogul is so it's discerning and thoughtful, and we have a ton of fun over there. But we brought Shay to my producer, and me and Shay, we're I don't know, it's like the Wild West. We're just like two bandits on a horse, riding out into the sunset, acting crazy. So it was kind of interesting to watch these energies converge. But I think when it comes to Shay and them, I get to bring a little bit of Mogul over there. I get to, when we start the episode out, I get to do my sort of Jinx thing where it's heavily researched and scripted. I make sure I hit all the background information of an album and set up our discussion. But I've actually learned something just being over here where it's a little more wild on No Skips, is bringing just some of the humanity to the discussion and in my tone, and bringing those things over to Mogul and making sure that when I talk, I sound like, how I really want to be represented and how I really want to sound. And it doesn't seem like that should be work, but it is. We talk the way we talk with our friends, and then we talk the way we talk when we're at work, and we talk the way we talk when we're ordering food. We have all these different versions of ourselves. And so I try to prep the same, but I try to change my approach when I sit down at the microphone and think how do I want to sound? Who am I speaking to? And, if this thing lives forever, what am I doing in this audio block that I'm going to be okay with?
And then, when we think about No Skips, that really is unique because it's a mix of, just, 3-4 of you chatting, inserting some music.
Yeah.
It really must be unique. And, as a listener, and I'm going to put a plug out here for the Kid Cudi episode, which was fantastic. I almost feel like I'm just sitting on the couch listening. And it must be
Well,
refreshing for like the three of you guys just to like chat.
what's cool about it is that you do all this work as a journalist, right? And just also just as a fan, right? Whether you remember going to a certain show or purchasing a certain album, Shay and I are able to ladder up those experiences. We've had some really fortunate moments in our lives where we got to interact with some of our musical heroes in this space. Whether it's I got to talk top 5 albums with LeBron well before I should have been talking to LeBron. Like I don't know who put me in that seat, but I got lucky. But or meeting Kid Cudi when I was an intern working at an ad agency, and so you're able to tell these stories that are just hidden. And then you start realizing like, I don't want to type them out on Twitter. I want you to hear it from my mouth, telling it the way I want to tell it with the jokes that are there and, let my friends react to it. So No Skips allows us to do some of that, bring the hard factual information of it, but also editorialize and tell all these hidden stories that come along the journey. Hopefully it makes people, journalism is a lot more than just like hanging out with rappers, but hopefully it excites someone out there who's like, hey, I don't really know where journalism can take you. It's like, hey, you can end up with a podcast and there's all these stories that come along with the work and all this fun and all these memories that you wouldn't get doing anything else.
So Brandon, before we get to the last question here, for everyone who's joined us today, we're just going to fire up a quick poll where we just want you to share some feedback, how you found the session today, the speakers. So just take a quick second and respond to that poll. So Brandon, last question for you. And this is, I've been dying to ask this question, with no skips, how do you decide what album you're going to cover in the next episode? Because man, you could do like thousands of episodes. How do you decide?
So when we first met, we all made our lists independently. Like we're like, okay, we'll all make our lists independently. Then we'll put them together on a Google Doc and see where the overlap is. And we have like 90% that we agree on. And then there's like that last 10 where either I wasn't alive to hear that album, or Shay does not like this artist, or so there's a little bit of tension there for us to pick. And then we just have a voting system. Luckily, there's a hidden 5th member of No Skips no one knows about, which is Tunde. And Tunde's sort of he's our tiebreaker, and he makes sure that we like keep the thing honest. And also we try to editorialize. Like if there's a big anniversary, like Missy Elliott, one of hip hop's like most important voices, let alone a trailblazer for female MCs. We were like, oh, she has an anniversary coming up. Tunde is the one who kept us on track for that and make sure that we tackle those other moments that fans are going to be excited about, that artists are going to be excited about. And hopefully, fingers crossed, Missy Elliott has heard this episode. I doubt it, but maybe she has. But it's tough. I feel so blessed in moments like that, where like the hardest thing that like I'm really doing is on a group chat with my friends arguing about which album we're going to argue about on a podcast. Like, and it's fun. And I think out of all the work I've done, this has been the show that people have responded to most instantly. And I think it's that we're spending hours arguing about which album we're going to pick, and those things reflect in the audience, and they feel the same as us. Even if they don't like my best song picks, they like the albums that we're choosing.
So Brandon, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today to share your perspective as a podcast host, creator, content creator, in how you think about the space, the intersection of how brands should be a part and think about being a part of podcasts, as well as leveraging all the niche targeting and content that's available on Spotify for them to engage with the audience. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you to Matt for joining us as well and sharing his view as a brand advertiser. And to everyone that joined us today, thank you for taking the time. For anyone where we haven't answered your question, someone from Spotify will respond directly back to you. And just remember, the podcasting space is growing. Last year, there were over 900,000 new podcasts created. Over 11 million Canadians are listening. And if you haven't yet, explore, being part of a podcast experience as a brand advertiser. So thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day and keep pumping out great content.